Chapter 4. Shame can be a horrible parasite. It can weigh a person down to uselessness. Martin's shame was a bloated tick of a thing, and it sloshed with his insecurities and guilt. He hadn't meant to attack the Bangladeshi clerk. He was just having a panic attack and saw something odd and reacted badly. If he hadn't been knocked unconscious, he would have apologized right away. Only the maniac slapped him unconscious and, well, he didn't want to think about what he said. Martin blitzed through the tunnels of the underground. His shame blinkered him so much that he did not notice his pursuers. They struggled to match his pace, and after a few hundred feet, they gave up. He wasn't particularly quick, but he didn't seem like he was going to slow down anytime soon. His heart thundered against his ribcage. He didn't want to be anywhere near those two gentlemen. As the sweat poured down his brow and splashed off his nose, he realized he left the station way behind and had got into one of the local parks. He slowed down to take a seat. His plantar fasciitis had only just been fixed, and he very much doubted that his soles would appreciate the hard pounding he just treated them to. Deep, deep breaths were swallowed, as he needed to calm down. If he didn't, he might have another attack, and had a feeling that it wouldn't end as peacefully as it did last time. Tearing off his tie, he used it to mop up the sweat around his forehead and dab away the tears that streamed from his face. He was such a clumsy fucker. Nadia would never believe it was an accident, and then he'd be a racist fuck, and she wouldn't touch him. Maybe he could make it right. He stood up suddenly and got very dizzy. The scary man was close by to someone else, and Rakesh was blitzing somewhere. He must have gotten a hold of a motorbike or something, because he was moving at a scary lick of speed. Martin fell to one knee, holding his temples, as he tried to calm down. Was he finally losing it? Was this high-stress scenario the one that finally pushed him into the madhouse? This felt certain, though he rationalized, even if it was just his imagination. It wasn't harmful, was it? Martin was a big guy. Too much man for too little suit. Husky was a word you might be inclined to use when describing him. He was soft, too. Lovable to those that had the patience to get to know him, as he was a liability and a half. If there were feet to be stood on, tea to be spilt, heads to be butt, papers to be spilled everywhere, he was your man. A charismatic man would laugh off most of his faux pas and still be well liked, but he was awkward. His size combined with his strength and clumsiness required a lot of forgiving. Usually, just as people were beginning to get over it, he would do something else that was catastrophic. Mr. Louis Petit had actually separated Martin's workstation from everybody else as he was so dangerous. However, his skills as a dactyloglyph were among the best in the business. It was undeniable. Only one of his colleagues had attempted any sort of friendship, and that was Nadia Breeze. He'd hoped she'd made it to safety, or had stayed safe at home. An image of three yobs appeared in his mind. All three wore snapbacks. One held a baseball bat, the other had fashioned a knuckle duster with knife blades under each knuckle. Another had padded martial arts gloves with nails pushed through them. The image was so convincing he didn't bother turning around. About 50 yards away, he could see a bicycle shop and a car park. Realizing that a dead dash to the shop would be beyond silly, he opted for the car park instead. The trio didn't expect a second burst of speed, so Martin got a few seconds of scrabble time, but he perhaps lost half a second tripping. He just about righted himself. Fortunately, the wet rope that had been aimed at him just missed and spattered against a tree. The acid, however, hit him square in the center of his back. Without hesitating, he slipped his jacket. There was no time to look, but the smell was horrendous, and the sizzling noise turned to cracking as the liquid ate into the concrete beneath. Martin turned on the gas and rushed into the car park before another salvo could be launched. He could hear them shouting. When he focused, he could tell that the third had simply started walking up the side of the building in an attempt to box him in. In a calmer frame of mind, he might have had time to be freaked out by that, but he was frantic. He sprinted up the stairs and grabbed the fire extinguisher from the guard's cabin. He quickly ran to the barrier on the first story, and wheezing, he swung with everything he could muster. The noise was comical, but the scream was not. Martin desperately tried to suck in more oxygen, but unfortunately, he had left himself open. Another silken rope sped at him from the ground floor, and while he blocked it with the extinguisher, he was forced to relinquish it, his only weapon, as it was yanked out of his hands. He leapt away from the rail before another rope hit him. Acid lashed over the rail, and slag-cut pucks of metal rolled past him. He ran to the stair and tried to figure out where they were. He stood perfectly still, and he could visualize them. They were trying to figure out a plan of attack and bickering directly beneath the rail. Martin hefted the motorbike to the edge and was about to push it when he sensed they had moved. "Fuck," he whispered. Escape was going to be tricky. It's not like Martin couldn't fight. He was a hefty lad and some fair weight to his punches, but there were two of them. They were the sort of folk who had done this often as well, so they knew what they were doing. He figured the Planeswalker was the Harry of the group, and the bastard with the rope was their trapper, and the spitter was their killer maybe. He wondered if he'd killed the Planeswalker. It was a heavy hit to the noggin, and with that fall as well. Pausing for a moment, he felt out to see if he could sense him. Surprisingly, he was writhing on the ground in a state of discombobulation, but in no state to give chase. He felt two ways about it. The fucker had just tried to kill him, but he didn't actually want to start killing people on a whim. It was only Tuesday, for fuck's sake. He leaned against the car, and his feet felt suddenly moist. Looking down, some acid splash had hit some cars, and the fuel had begun to leak out at the bottom of several. An idea sprung into his head, a very dangerous one at that. Retreating to the next level of the car park, he scanned again. The fine specimens had collected their comrade and taken him to the other side of the road to get him some air, but not nearly far enough so Martin could risk bolting. Scanning was getting easier with each use. It seemed to be based on how still and focused he could be. The breath came, something shook deep within his body, and when he exhaled, he could feel things. And if he focused, he could search for specific things. The engorged rag wrapped around the 2x4 was testament to that, and he had one hell of a joust plan for his possible victim. Taking stock of the situation, the enemy were down to two, and both had ranged and melee attacks, but at least the bat user had been taken out of the scenario. He was pretty sure that in the right setup he could take the trapper out. It was the bloody spitter. His acid was no joke, and his fucking punch daggers weren't toys. If any of the three had to die, it was probably that guy. Spitting blood from his mouth had a metallic, almost spicy taste. He felt ready for what was about to happen. He took out a pendant, held it to his lips, and whispered a short prayer. Trapper looked up to see a tire flung through a window of the adjacent building. It was shortly followed by someone leaping and nailing the landing. "Shit," he spat out. Spitter looked down at Walker. Occasionally he would wibble and gibble a bit. "It'll take him a bit, but he'll be good. Let's go." They started to make their way towards building 2, but a voice rang out. "Oi, you cum-guzzling, deep-throating, dick-melting rent boy. Keep away with your fizzy lips." Spitter was stunned. He hadn't considered that being intimate could possibly be a problem if he couldn't control his new ability. He actually stood there for a moment, completely destroyed. If Trapper hadn't coughed, trying to mask his chuckle, the chase would have probably ended there and then. Trapper tried to be subtle, but even Martin could see he was laughing. The billboard behind Spitter was some fast food chain advertising their new frozen beverages. Children with great beaming smiles sported milk mustaches, happily proclaiming the virtues of their new line of creamy milkshakes. A seasonal flavour, pumpkin, had been graffitied to read Blumpkin. Spitter shook. He was literally throbbing with rage. Martin continued his abuse. "Who'd take a gobber from you then, you oily syphilitic thunder cunt? It doesn't matter if you've got lips like turnbuckle covers. I'd sooner fix barnacles to my ballsack, you tatty bogle. You better get used to the taste of stoolage, as nobody's chancing their sausage near that movie, you fucking bambot." As Trapper stopped laughing, his lips pursed as he let out a pained "Ooh." But before he could even stop him, Spitter had charged into the car park. All the pretense of composure gone. He had been crushed like the polystyrene container he stamped on as he sprinted through the entrance. The bombastic barrage of blistering insults had come from the top floor, and when he caught that fucker, he was going to hold him down and throw up on his face. Trapper saw Martin leap into the building. It was confusing that the voice came from the car park, but someone had clearly leapt from the flats next door. He was going to head towards them. Kicking in the front door, Trapper saw Martin bounding towards the stairs, running straight at him. He tried to fire a strand right at him, but Martin blocked with his lance. Trapper relieved him of the weapon and started to laugh, but choked as he realised that it was on fire, and being pulled right towards him. Martin hadn't stopped running. He caught the end of the wood and hit Trapper square in the chest, knocking him several feet out the door and down the front steps. Leaping over Trapper's fetal form, which he left whimpering in excruciating stuttering coughs, he headed straight for the bike shop. With several wide swings, he broke the shop front window and liberated a bike. Meanwhile, Spitter had figured out how he'd been played. A mobile phone was left next to the intercom system with pre-recorded taunts. Somehow, the dude had destroyed just enough loudspeakers so that Spitter had been led to this specific point. Months ago, he would have laughed at being so well played. On the balance, he'd gotten a really swish phone out of the deal, but he felt nothing. He'd been warned that a hedonia might have developed further had he neglected his sessions. Marcus had tried to convince him to go back, but he hated the doctor. He missed Marcus so much. He wanted to tell him that he loved him, but the accident happened, and that was that. Looking out of the guard station, he saw Martin glide past on a bike. They would never catch him now. Banners for some comedy festival had huge printed Ha's on them, and a coincidental onomatopoeia crushed him further, as Martin gaily waved him goodbye. Spitter petulantly made his way towards Trapper and Walker. Melian spoke first. "Damn, Viper. You need to watch your temper, bruv." Spitter, Viper, nodded. The young man whom Martin labelled Walker sat up rubbing his skull. Fortunately, he'd gotten his arm up in time to protect his head. Gecko sucked his teeth. It was a particularly churlish sound. Man, he got away, didn't he? Fuck, man. We need some loot, or Betty is gonna break something, man. They all went quiet. Viper snapped back into focus. "We still have a few hours, and I have an idea. Betty loves meat, right?" Melian grinned.